Hello, beautiful souls. Welcome to this quiet space, a place where minds slow down and hearts rest. Before we begin this gentle, sleepy journey, just a small moment of support. If this meditation brings you calm, comfort, or clarity, please subscribe to the channel, gently tap the like button, and leave a comment to let us know you are here. Your support helps us continue creating these peaceful spaces for your mind, for your heart. Now, there is nothing else you need to do, nothing to think about. Let's begin. Close your eyes now and slowly settle into a comfortable position. Take a gentle breath in and slowly breathe out. Let your shoulders relax, let your jaw loosen, and allow your whole body to feel heavy. You stand at the edge of a forest. Just as dawn begins to soften the darkness, the air here feels different, cooler, denser somehow. It carries weight, as though it's made of more than just oxygen and nitrogen. There's a scent you can't quite name. Earth, moisture, life in 1,000 forms, all mingling into something ancient. You step forward. Beneath your feet, the ground gives slightly. Layers of leaves, decades old, compress with a whisper. Above, the canopy filters the early light into scattered coins of gold that shift and dance as branches sway. The wind moves through this place, not as it does across open plains, but slowly, deliberately, as though the forest itself is breathing. And perhaps it is. You stop. You listen. The sounds are subtle. A branch creaks somewhere high above. Water drips from a leaf, striking another, then another, creating a rhythm that feels almost musical. Somewhere distant, a bird calls, just once, and the forest absorbs the sound, softening it, cradling it. In this stillness, a question emerges. What would Earth be without this? Not just without trees. We can imagine that easily enough. Empty fields, barren hills, cities stretching wider without interruption. But what if we removed not just the trees themselves, but everything they do, everything they create, the invisible work happening in every leaf, every root, every square meter of this living, breathing system? What if we removed the forest's influence on the wind, on the rain, on the very air moving through your lungs right now? The question grows heavier the longer you stand here, because forests are not decorations. They are not the scenic backdrop to Earth's real story. They are not optional features that make the planet prettier, more pleasant, more Instagram-worthy. They are engines, silent, patient, impossibly complex engines that have been running for hundreds of millions of years. Engines that build the atmosphere you're breathing, that regulate the water cycles feeding rivers thousands of miles away, that hold together soil, climate, and countless forms of life. In an intricate web we're only beginning to understand. You take a breath, deep and slow, That breath connected you to this place in ways you cannot see. The oxygen entering your bloodstream right now was created here, or in places like this. The carbon dioxide you exhale will be captured by leaves, transformed, woven back into the living fabric of this forest. You are not separate from this place. You never were. The sun rises higher now. Light penetrates deeper. You can see the texture of bark on nearby trunks, the gradient of green in the understory, the way moisture clings to spider silk stretched between branches. Everything here is connected, not metaphorically, but literally. Beneath your feet, through channels you cannot see. This forest is communicating, sharing, balancing itself. And beyond this forest, across continents and centuries, other forests are doing the same work. Boreal forests wrapping the northern hemisphere like a green crown. Tropical rainforests straddling the equator, generating their own weather systems. Temperate forests clothing mountainsides, holding back erosion, filtering water that will flow to cities downstream. All of them breathing, all of them shaping the world. This is their story. Not a story of trees, exactly, but a story of systems, of time and transformation, of how life, given enough space and enough time, can build something so intricate, so powerful, that it changes the face of a planet. This is the story of how forests quietly shape the fate of Earth. And it begins not with forests as we know them, but with a single, audacious moment, hundreds of millions of years ago, when life decided to leave the water and reach toward the sky. To understand what forests mean to Earth, we need to travel backward, far backward. Not centuries or millennia, but hundreds of millions of years, to a time when the continents were arranged differently, when the climate was warmer and wetter, when the air itself was alien to what you know, to a time before forests existed at all. Picture Earth roughly 450 million years ago. The oceans are full of life. Trilobites crawling across the seafloor, early fish darting through murky waters, algae and cyanobacteria turning the shallows green. But the land? The land is barren, rocky, silent except for wind and water. No grass, because grass hasn't evolved yet. No flowers, for the same reason. No trees, no shrubs, no moss carpeting the stones. Just bare rock, dust, and the patience of geological time. But life, as it always does, found a way. The first pioneers were small, unimpressive by modern standards. Simple plants, perhaps no taller than your finger, clustered near the edges of water where moisture was reliable. They had no true roots, no leaves as we understand them, but they had something revolutionary: the ability to survive in air, to capture sunlight without being submerged, to anchor themselves to surfaces that had never before held life. These were not forests. Not yet. But they were the beginning. Time moved forward as it always does. Slowly. Relentlessly. Those early plants evolved. They developed better anchoring systems. Rudimentary roots that could reach into soil, stabilizing the plant, and drawing up moisture and minerals. They developed primitive vascular systems, internal plumbing that could transport water and nutrients from roots to higher structures. This was crucial. This meant plants could grow taller. And once height became possible, the race was on. By roughly 400 million years ago, during a period we now call the Devonian, the first forests appeared. They didn't look like the forests you might imagine. The trees, if we can call them that, were strange. Some resembled giant ferns. Others looked more like enormous reeds or oversized club mosses. Archaeopteris, one of the first true tree-like plants, grew perhaps 20 meters tall, with a trunk that resembled modern conifers, but with frond-like foliage that spread in horizontal layers. These early forests transformed the landscape in ways that still echo today. Their roots broke down rock, mixing organic matter with minerals to create the first true soils. They stabilized ground near rivers and lakes, preventing erosion. They created shade, which cooled the ground and allowed moisture to persist where it might otherwise evaporate. And most importantly, they began to change the atmosphere. But the real transformation came later, during the Carboniferous period, roughly 360 to 300 million years ago. This was the age of forests, in their wildest, strangest form. Imagine swamps the size of continents. Imagine club mosses, today a modest ground cover, growing 30 meters tall, their trunks scaled like reptile skin. Imagine dragonflies, with wingspans nearly a meter across, hunting through humid air, beneath canopies of primitive trees. The climate was warm. The atmosphere was thick with moisture and oxygen. So much oxygen that it reached levels of 35%, compared to today's 21%. This supercharged oxygen content had strange effects. It allowed insects to grow to enormous sizes, since their simple respiratory systems could support larger bodies. It made fires more frequent and more intense whenever lightning struck or volcanic activity provided a spark. But more than anything, it meant life was growing everywhere, growing fast and growing thick. And when these Carboniferous forests died, when ancient club mosses toppled into swamps, when fern-like trees collapsed into waterlogged soil, they didn't decay. Not entirely. The bacteria and fungi capable of breaking down lignin and cellulose efficiently hadn't evolved yet. So the dead plant matter accumulated, layer upon layer, year after year, century upon century. That accumulated plant matter, compressed under the weight of sediment and time, transformed. It became peat, then lignite, then eventually coal. Those ancient forests, those bizarre jungles of giant club mosses and towering horsetails, became the fossil fuels we extract from the ground today. Every lump of coal is a timestamp, a compressed memory of sunlight that fell on leaves 300 million years ago. But here's the crucial part. As all that carbon got buried, locked away in the ground, instead of cycling back into the atmosphere, the composition of Earth's atmosphere changed. Carbon dioxide levels dropped. Oxygen levels eventually stabilized. The planet cooled slightly, then warmed again, cycling through ages of ice and warmth. Forests didn't just exist on Earth. They reshaped it. They created the breathable atmosphere that would eventually allow mammals, including, much later, humans, to evolve. They stabilized the climate enough to allow complex ecosystems to develop. They built soil from barren rock, transforming lifeless stone into living ground capable of supporting ever more diverse forms of life. By the time we reached the age of dinosaurs, forests looked more familiar. Conifers dominated many landscapes. Cycads and ginkgos spread through subtropical regions. And by roughly 140 million years ago, flowering plants, angiosperms, appeared and began their rapid diversification. These flowering plants would eventually dominate. They evolved faster, spread more efficiently, created partnerships with insects and animals for pollination and seed dispersal. They became the oaks, maples, birches, figs, and thousands of other species that now make up the majority of modern forests. The forests you walk through today are the descendants of an evolutionary story spanning 400 million years. They carry within them the accumulated innovations of countless generations, root systems that evolved over millions of years, photosynthetic processes refined through endless iterations, defense mechanisms against herbivores and pathogens, partnerships with fungi and bacteria that enhance survival. When you stand in a forest, you stand in deep time, and the work those forests do, the quiet, essential work we're about to explore, is the result of 400 million years of refinement, of life figuring out how to live on land, how to grow tall, how to cooperate and compete, how to shape the environment to suit itself, which in turn shapes the life within it, in a loop that has no clear beginning or end. Forests made Earth habitable, and they're still doing it, every moment, in ways most of us never see or consider. Let's talk about breathing. You do it constantly, automatically, without thought. Your lungs expand, air rushes in, oxygen enters your bloodstream, carbon dioxide exits. Repeat, roughly 15 to 20 times per minute, 20,000 times per day. Over a lifetime, hundreds of millions of breaths, each one so mundane, you barely notice. But where does that oxygen come from? The simple answer is photosynthesis. But that word, photosynthesis, is so familiar that it's become invisible. We learn it in school. Remember something about chlorophyll and sunlight and chemistry, and then move on. We rarely pause to consider what an absolutely wild process this is. So let's slow down. Let's watch it happen. Picture a single leaf on a tree. Not a special tree. Not an exotic species. Just an ordinary leaf. On an ordinary tree. Somewhere in an ordinary forest. Morning sunlight strikes its surface. The leaf is green. Vividly. Almost impossibly green. In the right light. That color exists because of millions of chloroplasts scattered through the leaf cells, each one containing chlorophyll, the molecule responsible for capturing light. When photons from the sun strike a chlorophyll molecule, something remarkable happens. The energy from that light is captured. Not all of it. The process is far from perfectly efficient, but enough. That captured energy is used to split water molecules that the tree has drawn up from the soil through its roots. Water, H2O, gets broken apart. The hydrogen is kept. The oxygen is released into the air, into the atmosphere, into your lungs. Every breath you take contains oxygen. That was created this way. Sunlight striking leaves, water being split, oxygen being released as what amounts to a waste product. From the plant's perspective, the plant doesn't need the oxygen. It needs the hydrogen, which it will combine with carbon dioxide to create glucose, sugar, which stores the sun's energy in a form the plant can use. But we need that oxygen desperately, constantly, and forests produce it at a scale that's difficult to comprehend. A single large tree, something like an oak or maple, can produce roughly 120 kilograms of oxygen per year. That's enough to supply 2 people with breathable air for 12 months. A hectare of forest, roughly the size of 2 football fields, might contain hundreds of such trees, plus countless smaller trees, shrubs, and ground plants, all photosynthesizing, all releasing oxygen. Scale that up to the Amazon rainforest, which covers roughly 5.5 million square kilometers, or to the boreal forests, ringing the northern hemisphere, covering more than 15 million square kilometers, or to all forests globally, which currently cover about 4 billion hectares, roughly 30% of Earth's land surface. The numbers become astronomical. The amount of oxygen being produced every day, every hour, every moment is beyond ordinary comprehension. But here's where we need to be careful. Precise. There's a common belief that forests are the lungs of the earth, producing most or all of the oxygen we breathe. You've probably heard this, especially in reference to the Amazon. It sounds right. It feels true, but it's not quite accurate. The majority of Earth's oxygen is actually produced by the oceans, specifically by phytoplankton, microscopic organisms drifting through the sunlit surface waters. These tiny creatures, many of them single-celled, are photosynthesizing constantly, and their sheer numbers mean they produce somewhere between 50 and 80% of the oxygen entering our atmosphere. Does that make forests less important? No, not even slightly, because forests do something more complex than just producing oxygen. They regulate it, balance it, cycle it through systems that keep atmospheric composition stable over long timescales. Let's talk about carbon. Carbon dioxide, CO2, is what plants breathe in while we breathe out. When a leaf stomata open, tiny pores on its surface, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere diffuses into the leaf's interior. Inside, in the chloroplasts, that carbon dioxide meets the hydrogen derived from split water molecules. Using the energy captured from sunlight, the plant combines these ingredients to create glucose. This is carbon capture. Literal, physical removal of carbon from the atmosphere and incorporation into solid, living tissue. That glucose doesn't just sit there. It's used. Some of it fuels the tree's metabolism, the energy needed to grow, to repair damage, to maintain its cellular machinery. Some of it is converted into cellulose, the structural material that makes up the tree's cell walls. It's wood. It's increasing mass. Some is used to create leaves, flowers, fruits, seeds. When a tree grows, it is quite literally building itself out of air and water and sunlight. A mature tree might contain several tons of carbon, all of it pulled from the atmosphere over decades or centuries. Multiply that by billions of trees across all the world's forests, and you're looking at a carbon sink of immense proportions. Forests currently store approximately 660 billion tons of carbon globally, roughly equivalent to 70 years of human carbon emissions. At current rates, this is why forests matter for climate, not just because they produce oxygen, but because they're actively removing carbon dioxide from the air and locking it away in wood, roots, and soil. But the cycle doesn't end there. When a tree dies, when it falls during a storm, or succumbs to disease, or simply reaches the end of its lifespan, decomposition begins. Bacteria and fungi break down the wood, releasing some of that stored carbon back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Animals feeding on the decomposing wood or on the fungi growing on it also respire, releasing more carbon dioxide. In a stable, mature forest, this creates a balance. Carbon is constantly being captured through photosynthesis and constantly being released through respiration and decomposition. The forest reaches a kind of equilibrium where the rate of carbon capture roughly equals the rate of carbon release. But not all carbon returns to the atmosphere quickly. Some gets incorporated into soil as leaves fall and decay, as roots die and break down. Their carbon becomes part of the organic matter in the forest floor. Some of this carbon can remain locked in soil for centuries or longer, depending on conditions. This is the carbon cycle, and forests are central to it. They're not just producing oxygen and storing carbon, they're regulating the flow of these elements through Earth's systems. They're creating patterns of exchange that affect climate, that influence how quickly the planet warms or cools, that determine how much carbon dioxide remains in the atmosphere at any given time. Think of forests as vast, slow-moving chemical reactors. They take in carbon dioxide and water and light. They produce oxygen, organic matter, and stored energy. They do this constantly, on every scale, from individual leaves to continental forests, spanning millions of square kilometers. And they've been doing this for hundreds of millions of years. The atmosphere you breathe exists because of this process. The air that fills your lungs right now, roughly 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, 1% argon and trace gases, has been shaped by photosynthesis over geological time. The oxygen-rich atmosphere that allows complex animal life to exist was created by plants, algae, and cyanobacteria photosynthesizing for billions of years. Forests didn't do it alone, but they are part of the great engine that maintains it. Every leaf is a factory. Every tree is a chemical plant. Every forest is an industrial complex of staggering sophistication, producing compounds we need to survive, regulating atmospheric gases, cycling carbon, cycling water, cycling nutrients, all without noise, without waste, without stopping. You take a breath. In that breath is oxygen created by leaves you will never see. In forests you may never visit, through processes running continuously in billions of locations across the planet. You are breathing because forests along with phytoplankton, along with grasslands and wetlands, and all photosynthesizing life, create air, not metaphorically, literally. They create the air. Now we go deeper into something less visible, but equally profound. Forests don't just capture carbon and release oxygen. They actively engineer the climate around them. They shape temperature, precipitation, wind patterns, and humidity in ways that extend far beyond their physical boundaries. To understand this, we need to talk about water. A tree draws water from the soil through its roots. This isn't passive. It requires energy, complex transport systems within the tree's vascular tissue, and a mechanism called transpiration. Water moves up from roots, through the trunk and branches, to the leaves. Once in the leaves, much of that water evaporates through the stomata, those tiny pores that also allow carbon dioxide to enter. This evaporation is called transpiration, and it's happening constantly. A single large tree can transpire hundreds of liters of water per day. During the growing season, a forest transpires staggering volumes, billions of liters daily. The Amazon rainforest, for example, releases roughly 20 billion tons of water vapor into the atmosphere. Each day, 20 billion tons. Every single day. Where does all that water vapor go? Into the air. Obviously. But what then? That water vapor rises. As it rises, it cools. As it cools, it condenses into droplets. Those droplets form clouds. Those clouds move, carried by wind. Eventually, the moisture falls as rain, somewhere downwind of the forest. This is not a small effect. This is not a minor contribution to local weather. Forests create rain. Not everywhere. Not infinitely. Not without limitations. But in many regions, especially in the tropics, the water cycle is so intimately connected to forest cover that removing the forest fundamentally changes rainfall patterns. Researchers studying the Amazon have found that air masses passing over the rainforest pick up moisture through evapotranspiration, carry it westward, and release it as rain. Further inland, without the forest, much of that moisture would never enter the atmosphere. The region would be drier. Rivers would carry less water. The landscape itself would transform. But it goes further, because those water particles rising from leaves don't just form clouds. They also carry energy. When water evaporates, it absorbs heat. When it condenses back into droplets in the atmosphere, it releases that heat. This is latent heat transfer, and it's a massive force in global climate systems. Forests, through transpiration, are moving heat from the surface into the atmosphere. They're cooling the ground beneath their canopy while adding energy to atmospheric circulation. This affects everything from local breezes to massive weather patterns that span continents. Let's talk about temperature more directly. Stand in an open field on a summer day. Feel the heat, the sun beating down on bare soil or grass, the air shimmering. Now walk into a forest. The temperature drops, not just a little, sometimes by several degrees. The shade explains some of this. The canopy intercepts sunlight before it reaches the ground. But there's more happening. That transpiration we discussed, it cools the air, like sweat evaporating from your skin on a hot day, cooling you. Water evaporating from leaves cools the surrounding air. A forest is, in effect, a giant evaporative cooler, continuously moderating temperature. But forests also affect temperature at larger scales. The dark green of forest canopies absorbs sunlight differently than bare ground or snow. This affects albedo, the amount of sunlight reflected back into space versus absorbed by the surface. Forests generally have a lower albedo than grasslands or croplands, meaning they absorb more heat, but they also lock up carbon, which offsets warming. The net effect varies by location and forest type, but overall, forests tend to cool the planet, especially in the tropics. Then there's wind. Forests create drag. When wind encounters a forest, it slows down. Trees act as obstacles, breaking up airflow, creating turbulence, reducing wind speed at ground level. This affects everything from soil erosion to how animals move through the landscape. But on a larger scale, forests influence wind patterns by creating areas of differing temperature and pressure. A large forest can generate its own circulation patterns, with air rising over the warm canopy and cooler air flowing in to replace it. These local circulation cells can interact with broader weather systems, subtly influencing where storms form, how they move, how much rain they produce. In the Amazon, this reaches extraordinary levels. The Amazon rainforest doesn't just respond to climate, it creates it. The forest generates so much moisture through evapotranspiration that it essentially manufactures its own rain. Air masses entering the western Amazon from the Atlantic Ocean pick up more and more moisture as they travel across the forest. This moisture falls as rain, is absorbed by trees, is transpired back into the atmosphere, falls as rain again, in a cycle that can repeat multiple times. As the air mass moves westward, scientists call these flying rivers, massive flows of atmospheric moisture moving across the Amazon basin, containing more water than the Amazon River itself carries to the ocean. And this doesn't just affect the Amazon. That moisture eventually reaches the Andes Mountains, where it rises, cools, and falls as rain and snow. That precipitation feeds rivers, flowing down the eastern slopes of the Andes. Some of it eventually makes its way to the Rio de la Plata Basin, one of the world's largest river systems, providing water for agriculture. In Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, and Argentina, remove the Amazon forest, and you don't just lose trees. You disrupt water cycles, affecting an entire continent. You change rainfall patterns in regions thousands of kilometers away. You reduce river flows. You alter agricultural productivity. You fundamentally reshape the climate system of a substantial portion of Earth. This is what climate engineering looks like. Not through technology, not through deliberate human intervention, but through the accumulated action of billions of trees, photosynthesizing, transpiring, growing, living, dying, and being replaced, generation after generation, in a system that has been refining itself for millions of years. Other forests do this too, though perhaps less dramatically. Temperate forests in Europe, North America, and Asia influence local and regional climate. Boreal forests, covering northern latitudes, affect snow cover, which affects albedo, which affects how much solar energy the planet retains versus reflects back into space. Everywhere forests exist, they are quietly, continuously adjusting the climate around them. They cool the surface. They move water from soil to sky. They influence wind. They moderate temperature extremes. They create conditions that allow other life to thrive, which in turn supports the forest in feedback loops that stabilize over time. This is not conscious. Trees are not making decisions, not planning, not intending to engineer climate. They're just living, capturing light, drawing water, growing, reproducing. But the collective effect of all this living across billions of trees, in billions of hectares of forest, is climate engineering on a planetary scale. And when we disrupt forests, when we cut them down, burn them, replace them with agriculture or development, we're not just losing trees, we're dismantling climate systems that regulate temperature, precipitation, and atmospheric composition. We're removing engineers that work for free, continuously, without maintenance or oversight, performing services we don't know how to replicate with any technology we possess. Stand in that forest again. Feel the cool air. Notice the moisture. Hear the wind moving differently here. Then in open country, you're standing inside a climate machine, a living system that is actively shaping the weather, the seasons, the long-term patterns of temperature and rainfall that define this region. And it's doing it quietly, patiently, one leaf at a time. Some forests matter more than others. Not morally, not aesthetically, but functionally. Some forests are so large, so biologically productive, so deeply integrated into global systems, that they operate at a different scale entirely. The Amazon is one such forest. Imagine looking at Earth from space. Look at South America. There, sprawling across the northern half of the continent, is a mass of green, so dense, it appears almost solid from orbit. This is the Amazon rainforest, roughly 5.5 million square kilometers of continuous or semi-continuous forest, spanning 9 countries: Brazil, Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. To put that size in perspective, the Amazon is nearly as large as the entire continental United States. It contains approximately 400 billion individual trees. It holds roughly 10% of all species on Earth. It stores somewhere between 150 and 200 billion tons of carbon, roughly 15 years of global human emissions. This is not just a forest. This is a planetary system. The Amazon River, which drains this basin, carries more water than the next 7 largest rivers combined. It discharges roughly 200,000 cubic meters of water into the Atlantic Ocean every second. That freshwater plume extends hundreds of kilometers offshore, altering ocean salinity, affecting currents, influencing marine ecosystems. But the river is only part of the story. Remember those flying rivers we discussed earlier? The atmospheric moisture transported across the forest. The Amazon basin cycles water on a scale matched nowhere else on Earth. Roughly half of the rain falling in the Amazon comes from moisture transpired by the forest itself. The trees create the rain that sustains the trees. It's a self-perpetuating system, a loop that has stabilized over thousands of years. Walk into this forest, if you can, not along a path or near a settlement, but deep into the interior, far from any clearing. The experience is overwhelming. The density of life, defies easy description. Vines thicker than your leg spiral up tree trunks, reaching 40 or 50 meters into the air. The canopy is so dense that even at midday, only a few % of sunlight reaches the ground. The air is thick with moisture. You can feel it coating your skin, filling your lungs. With every breath, sounds surround you. Birds calling in the canopy, most of them invisible. Insects buzzing, clicking, chirping, in countless varieties. Somewhere in the distance, howler monkeys announce their territory, with calls that carry for kilometers. Leaves rustle as something moves through the understory. A peccary, perhaps, or an agouti, or one of dozens of other mammals you'll never see, but know are there. The biodiversity here is staggering. Current estimates suggest the Amazon contains around 16,000 tree species. That's more tree species in one forest than exist in all of North America. There are 2,500 species of fish in the Amazon River system, more than in the entire Atlantic Ocean. Insect diversity is so high that a single tree can host more ant species than exist in all of the British Isles. Why so much diversity? Multiple factors. The climate is stable, warm year-round, with reliable rainfall. There's been no recent glaciation here, unlike in temperate regions, which means species have had uninterrupted time to evolve and specialize. The sheer size of the forest creates countless niches, opportunities for specialization that wouldn't exist in smaller systems. But this incredible system is under pressure. Deforestation in the Amazon has been ongoing for decades. Roads penetrate deeper into the forest, bringing logging, cattle ranching, soy farming, mining. Satellite data shows that roughly 17% of the Amazon has been cleared entirely, with another 20% degraded by selective logging or edge effects. 17% might not sound like a crisis. The forest is enormous. Surely it can absorb some loss? But systems don't fail linearly. They often remain stable up to a certain threshold, then shift rapidly into a new state. And the Amazon may be approaching such a threshold. Here's the concern. As the forest is cleared, less moisture is transpired into the atmosphere. Less moisture means less rain. Less rain means more stress on the remaining forest. More droughts, more tree death, more vulnerability to fire. Fire is not natural to this rainforest. These trees didn't evolve with fire. They're not adapted to survive it. Once fire enters this system, it can spread, killing trees that have stood for centuries. dead trees release their stored carbon, they stop transpiring moisture. The feedback loop accelerates. Drier conditions lead to more fire. More fire leads to more tree death. More tree death leads to even drier conditions. Some scientists have proposed the concept of a tipping point, a threshold beyond which the Amazon might shift from rainforest to a drier, more open ecosystem, a savanna, perhaps, or something in between. The exact location of this threshold is debated. Some models suggest 20 to 25% deforestation could trigger it. We're already at 17%. If the Amazon tips, the consequences extend far beyond South America. That massive carbon sink becomes a carbon source. As trees die and decompose, atmospheric carbon dioxide increases, accelerating climate change globally. The flying rivers diminish, reducing rainfall in agricultural regions of southern Brazil, potentially affecting food production for hundreds of millions of people. Global biodiversity takes a catastrophic hit as species endemic to the Amazon disappear. Ocean currents could be affected as freshwater input from the Amazon decreases. Regional climate patterns across South America shift in unpredictable ways. And once the transition begins, reversing it may be impossible. On human timescales, you can't simply replant a rainforest and expect it to return to its previous state. The climate has changed. The soil has changed. The species that made up the original forest may no longer be able to establish themselves. This is not meant to be alarmist. These are possibilities, not certainties. The system is complex, and our understanding is incomplete, but the risk is real. The Amazon matters, not just because it's beautiful, not just because it contains incredible biodiversity, but because it performs functions critical to Earth's climate system. It stores carbon on a scale measured in billions of tons. It cycles water on a scale measured in billions of tons per day. It regulates temperature across an entire continent. It provides a stability that allows other systems, agricultural, economic, social, to function, and it's fragile in ways that only become obvious when you understand how it works. That self-sustaining water cycle, it depends on forest cover remaining above certain thresholds. That incredible biodiversity, much of it is specialized to rainforest conditions and can't survive in degraded landscapes. That carbon storage, it can reverse rapidly. If the forest starts dying, stand at the edge of a clearing in the Amazon. On one side, the forest, dense, Green, alive with sound. On the other side, bare ground. Maybe some cattle, maybe charred stumps. If the clearing was made with fire, the transition is abrupt, absolute, and you realize every clearing like this is not just removing trees, it's dismantling systems, breaking connections, reducing the forest's ability to maintain itself. The Amazon is not just trees. It's a living engine, one that runs on sunlight and water, that creates its own climate, that stores carbon on a planetary scale, that houses more diversity than almost anywhere else on Earth. And we're still not entirely sure how much we can disrupt it before it stops working. Let's go down, below the surface, into the soil. You walk through a forest, and what you see are trees, vertical structures reaching skyward, competing for light, leaves, branches, trunks, the visible architecture of the forest. But beneath your feet, invisible, spread through the soil in every direction, is another forest entirely. A mirror image, perhaps. A world of roots, threads, channels, and connections that rivals in complexity everything you can see above ground. This is where trees really live. The part of a tree you see above ground, the trunk, branches, leaves, is supported by an often equally massive root system below. Some trees send deep taproots plunging downward, seeking water and stability. Others spread shallow roots outward, far beyond the canopy, maximizing access to nutrients in the topsoil. But roots do more than anchor and absorb. They connect. They interact. They form partnerships with organisms in the soil, creating networks that link not just one tree, but entire forests. At the center of this underground system are fungi. Fungi are strange organisms, not plants. They cannot photosynthesize, not animals. They do not hunt or move in the ways animals do. They digest externally, secreting enzymes into their surroundings, breaking down organic matter, then absorbing the nutrients released. They grow as vast networks of microscopic threads, called hyphae, threads so fine that a single gram of forest soil can contain meters, sometimes kilometers, of them. Some fungi form intimate relationships with tree roots. These are mycorrhizal fungi, and without them, modern forests would not function as they do. Here's the exchange. A fungal hypha encounters a tree root. Under the right conditions, it wraps around it, or penetrates its outer layers, forming a structure called a mycorrhiza. Then the trade begins. The fungus extracts nutrients from the soil, especially phosphorus and nitrogen, elements trees struggle to access alone. In return, the tree supplies the fungus with sugars, Carbon compounds created through photosynthesis, energy the fungus cannot generate for itself. Both benefit. Neither thrives as well alone. But the network does not stop at one tree. A single fungal organism can connect to dozens, sometimes hundreds, of trees, sometimes even across different species. Because the fungal network is physically continuous, one interconnected web beneath the forest floor, resources can move through it. Carbon, nitrogen, water, flowing from one root system to another. A tree in full sunlight, producing more sugars than it needs, can, through shared fungal connections, transfer carbon to a shaded neighbor. A tree accessing water in one patch of soil may indirectly support another, growing in drier ground. This system has been nicknamed the Wood Wide Web, a metaphor for the underground connectivity that links forest life. It's important to remain precise. We know resources move. We know trees are connected through fungi. What remains under investigation is how intentional these transfers are, whether they represent evolved cooperation or simply the physics and chemistry of connected systems. What we can say clearly is this: a forest is not a collection of isolated competitors. It is an integrated system where trees, fungi, bacteria, nematodes, arthropods are woven together physically and chemically. Consider an old, mature tree. Its roots extend wide. Its fungal partnerships are deep and established. Through those fungal networks, it may be connected to younger trees nearby. Research has shown that seedlings growing in deep shade can receive carbon through shared fungal pathways, carbon that improves their survival. When light is scarce, remove the mature tree, and you remove more than wood and leaves. You disrupt the network it anchored. Beneath the soil, roots release chemicals, organic acids, enzymes, signaling compounds. These shape the microbial community around them, attracting beneficial organisms, sometimes deterring competitors. Above ground, trees under insect attack release volatile compounds into the air. Nearby trees detect these chemicals and increase their own defensive chemistry. Some evidence suggests similar signaling may occur underground, through roots, and possibly through fungal networks. Though this frontier of research is still unfolding, what is certain is this: forest soil is not dirt. It is alive, a living matrix of organisms, engaged in constant transformation. A handful of mature forest soil may contain billions of bacteria, thousands of species, fungal threads weaving through every grain, protozoa grazing on bacteria, nematodes feeding on fungi, arthropods shredding fallen leaves, all of them participating in nutrient cycling, breaking down dead matter, converting complex organic molecules into forms plants can absorb, building soil structure, creating pore spaces that hold water and air, preventing nutrients from washing away with rain. Without this underground world, the forest above cannot stand. You can remove the trees, and for a time, the system persists because the soil remains, the microbes remain, the fungal networks remain. Given time and protection, seedlings establish, saplings rise, and forest returns. But strip the soil away, compact it heavily, poison it, and recovery slows dramatically. Sometimes it stops entirely because you have destroyed not just the visible forest, but its foundation. Urban expansion, intensive agriculture, certain mining practices can disrupt soil systems for decades or centuries, and planting trees alone does not automatically restore the underground network. Fungi must recolonize, microbial communities must rebuild, soil structure must reform. This takes time, often more time than we are willing to wait. Protecting forests, therefore, means protecting soil. Sustainable forestry practices focus not only on which trees are cut, but on minimizing soil disturbance, maintaining organic matter, preserving the underground web, because the forest you see is only half the organism. The other half is beneath you, invisible, silent, constantly working, connecting everything, making the visible forest possible. Next time you walk among trees, imagine it. Under every step, roots interlacing, fungal threads linking tree to tree, carbon moving, water flowing, signals passing through darkness. A hidden architecture, older than humanity, refined over hundreds of millions of years. Quiet, patient, essential. The word biodiversity feels clinical, measured in charts, summarized in reports. But the reality of it is anything but clinical. Imagine standing at dawn in the Amazon rainforest. The air is cool but heavy with moisture. The sun hasn't risen yet, and already the forest is awake. A single bird calls, then another, then 10. Each voice distinct, each belonging to a different species. Somewhere in the canopy, a troop of monkeys moves through branches. Leaves shake, fruit drops, night insects retreat, day active species emerge. You stand still and slowly realize almost everything you see is different from everything else. The tree in front of you, one species. The vine wrapped around it, another. The orchid clinging to its bark, another still. The beetle crossing the leaf at your feet, one of perhaps thousands of beetle species in this forest alone. This is biodiversity. Not a statistic, but overwhelming variety. Life layered upon life, difference upon difference. And forests, especially tropical forests, contain more of it than almost any other ecosystem on Earth. Why? The answer begins with structure. A forest is not flat. It is three-dimensional. It has layers. At the bottom, the forest floor, dim, humid, cooler than above. Leaf litter accumulates here. Fungi thread through decomposing wood. Insects and millipedes break down organic matter. Amphibians thrive in the moisture. Ground-dwelling mammals forage quietly. Above that, the understory, shrubs, saplings, young trees waiting for light. Different birds specialize here. Different insects. Different predators. Then the canopy, dense with leaves, bright with filtered sunlight. Most of the forest's photosynthesis happens here. Flowers bloom here. Fruit ripens here. Pollinators arrive. Birds feed. Monkeys travel from crown to crown. And in many tropical forests, an emergent layer rises even higher. Giant trees pushing above the canopy, their crowns exposed to full sun and wind. Each layer is a different climate, different light, different temperature, different humidity. Each layer creates new niches, new roles for species to evolve into. Multiply that vertical complexity across millions of hectares, and diversity expands dramatically. Now add time. Tropical forests have remained forested for tens of millions of years. Regions like the Amazon basin were not repeatedly scoured by ice sheets during the last ice ages. Unlike large parts of North America and Europe, which means evolution continued without constant ecological resets. More time means more speciation. Populations separated by rivers, by mountain ridges like the Andes, by sheer distance, slowly diverge genetically. Given enough generations, one species becomes two, two become 10, 10 become hundreds. Climate reinforces this. Year-round warmth and rainfall allow life to remain active continuously. No winter dormancy, no months-long shutdown. Species can specialize narrowly, feeding on one plant, pollinating one flower, occupying one precise niche. And then something remarkable happens. Biodiversity begins to generate more biodiversity. A plant evolves a chemical toxin to deter herbivores. An insect evolves resistance to that toxin. A predator evolves to specialize on that insect. A parasite evolves to exploit the predator. Each innovation creates opportunity for another. A cascade of evolutionary responses, layer upon layer, over millions of years. This feedback loop produces ecosystems of extraordinary intricacy. Consider a single mature tree in the Amazon rainforest. It may support hundreds of species, birds nesting in its branches, ant colonies in hollow stems, epiphytes, orchids, bromeliads, ferns, rooted in pockets of debris along its limbs, frogs living in water trapped between leaves, fungi decomposing fallen wood, beetles boring into bark, wasps parasitizing those beetles. The tree is not merely an individual organism. It is an ecosystem, a vertical landscape. Multiply that by billions of trees, and the scale becomes almost incomprehensible. Temperate forests, such as those once widespread across eastern North America, contain fewer species than tropical forests, but still extraordinary diversity. Dozens of tree species, hundreds of bird species, thousands of insects. Predators like the gray wolf have acted as keystone regulators in some systems. By limiting deer populations, they prevent overgrazing of saplings, allowing forest regeneration, which sustains insects, which sustain birds. Remove the predator, and the structure shifts. Understory declines. Diversity contracts. In tropical systems, certain fruiting trees play similar keystone roles, providing food during lean seasons, sustaining animals that disperse seeds. For dozens of other plant species, remove one, and effects ripple outward, because biodiversity is not just numbers. It is relationships, food webs, pollination networks, seed dispersal chains, predator-prey balances, symbioses, competition, parasitism, all interwoven. High biodiversity creates resilience. If one species declines, others may partially fill its ecological role. Ecosystem functions, nutrient cycling, productivity, carbon storage, continue. In simpler systems, loss hits harder. There are fewer backups, fewer alternative pathways, and much of this diversity remains unknown. Scientists estimate perhaps 8 million eukaryotic species on Earth. Roughly 1.5 million have been formally described, meaning millions remain unnamed, and a large proportion live in tropical forests. Every year, researchers discover new insects, new fungi, new plant species, occasionally even new mammals or birds. Each discovery underscores how incomplete our understanding remains. At the same time, extinction rates are estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times higher than background rates. Habitat loss, fragmentation, climate change, driving species toward disappearance, often before they are ever documented. This is the biodiversity crisis, and forests sit at its center, because forests hold such a disproportionate share of life. When you walk through a forest, you are moving through the most intricate living systems on Earth. Every leaf surface, every trunk cavity, every cubic meter of air, every handful of soil, alive with organisms interacting in ways we are only beginning to understand. And all of it, every sound at dawn, every hidden insect, every unseen fungal thread, depends on the forest remaining intact, functional, alive. Picture a mountain slope, steep, covered in forest from the valley floor to near the summit. Rain falls. Heavy rain, the kind that comes with storms that last hours or days. Where does all that water go? Without the forest, the answer is simple and violent. Water strikes bare ground. It runs downhill, gathering speed and volume, carving gullies into the soil, washing sediment into streams that become torrents. At the base of the mountain, flooding occurs. Rivers burst their banks. Erosion is severe. The water rushes away to the sea, carrying topsoil, nutrients, and anything else it can move. Now add the forest back. The same rain falls. But this time, it encounters the canopy first. Leaves intercept raindrops. Some water clings to leaf surfaces, evaporating before it ever reaches the ground. The rest drips slowly downward, hitting branches, hitting more leaves, losing energy with each impact. By the time water reaches the forest floor, it's falling gently. Drips, not torrents. And the forest floor itself is covered in layers of leaf litter, moss, fallen branches. This absorbs the water. The soil beneath, held together by roots, is porous. Water seeps in rather than running off. It percolates down through soil layers, filtering through organic matter and mineral particles, moving slowly into groundwater. Some water is absorbed by tree roots, drawn upward, transpired back into the atmosphere through leaves. Some continues downward, recharging aquifers deep underground. Some emerges as springs further down the slope, feeding streams that now flow steadily rather than fluctuating wildly between flood and drought. The difference is staggering. Forested watersheds produce cleaner water, more consistent stream flow, less flooding, and less erosion than deforested ones. This isn't a minor effect. It's a transformation of the entire hydrological system. Let's look at each part more carefully. First, interception. Forest canopies can intercept 10 to 40% of rainfall, depending on the forest type and rain intensity. That water either evaporates or drips slowly to the ground over time, smoothing out the intensity of precipitation reaching the forest floor. This alone reduces erosion significantly. Second, infiltration. Forest soils, enriched with organic matter from decaying leaves and woody material, are highly porous. The roots create channels through the soil. Soil organisms, earthworms, insects, burrowing mammals, create additional channels. All of this increases the soil's capacity to absorb water. In a healthy forest, very little water runs off the surface. Most of it infiltrates, sometimes at rates of several centimeters per hour. Compare that to compacted soil, or paved surfaces, where almost no infiltration occurs and almost all water runs off immediately. Third, storage and gradual release. Water infiltrating into forest soil doesn't just disappear. It's stored in the soil's pore spaces and in underground aquifers. This stored water is released slowly. Springs fed by forest watersheds often continue flowing even during dry periods, because they're sustained by groundwater recharged during previous rains. This buffering effect is incredibly valuable. It means rivers fed by forested watersheds maintain more consistent flow year-round. Less flooding during wet periods. Less drying up during droughts. This consistency is vital for aquatic ecosystems, for human water supply, for agriculture, for hydroelectric generation. Fourth, filtration. As water percolates through forest soil, it's filtered. Organic matter and soil particles capture pollutants, sediment, nutrients. By the time water emerges in a spring or stream, it's often remarkably clean. Forests essentially act as natural water treatment plants. Municipal water supplies often draw from forested watersheds specifically for this reason. The city of New York, for example, gets most of its water from watersheds in the Catskill Mountains. Maintaining forest cover in those watersheds is cheaper and more effective than building additional water treatment facilities. Fifth, erosion control. Tree roots hold soil in place. On steep slopes, this is critical. Without roots binding the soil, heavy rain can trigger landslides, debris flows, massive erosion events that strip away topsoil built up over centuries. Forested slopes are far more stable than deforested ones. The 1998 flooding in Central America, following Hurricane Mitch, illustrates this. Areas with intact forest experienced relatively minor erosion and landslides. Deforested slopes, especially those cleared for agriculture, experienced catastrophic landslides. Entire hillsides slumped away, burying communities downstream. The death toll exceeded 10,000 people, with much of the damage directly attributable to deforestation. This pattern repeats globally. Flooding in the Philippines, in Indonesia, in Madagascar, in Haiti, often the severity of floods and landslides correlates directly with forest loss in the affected watersheds. It's not that forests prevent all flooding. Forests can't stop massive precipitation events, but they reduce peak flows, extend the time between rain and flood, and dramatically reduce erosion and landslides. Forests also affect the water cycle at larger scales. We discussed earlier how forests release moisture through transpiration, creating rainfall downwind. But forests also affect seasonal patterns of water availability. In tropical regions with distinct wet and dry seasons, forests moderate the transition between them. The forest stores water during the wet season, releases it slowly during the dry season, maintaining stream flow and atmospheric moisture even when rain is scarce. Remove the forest, and the seasonal swings become more extreme. More flooding during the wet season, more drought during the dry season. The landscape becomes less hospitable, less productive, more vulnerable to degradation. This affects agriculture. Farmers downstream of forests often benefit from the consistent water supply those forests provide. Remove the forests to expand cropland, and initially production might increase. But over time, as water cycles destabilize, as floods and droughts become more severe, as topsoil erodes, agricultural productivity often declines. It's a classic case of short-term thinking creating long-term problems. The forest's value as a water regulator is invisible until it's gone. By then, reversing the damage is difficult and expensive. There are economic calculations that make this clear. In some cases, paying to protect forest in a watershed is cheaper than building infrastructure to replace the services that forest provides. A forest isn't just valuable for its timber. It's providing flood control, water filtration, flow regulation, and erosion prevention worth millions or billions of dollars annually. Ecuador recognized this. In 2015, the country created a national fund to finance watershed conservation, supported by taxes on water use. The idea is simple. Cities and agricultural operations benefit from clean, consistent water provided by upstream forests. So they contribute to protecting those forests. Everyone benefits. This is the kind of thinking that values forests not just as resources to exploit, but as infrastructure. Living infrastructure, maintaining itself, providing services essential to human well-being. Stand by a stream flowing out of a forested watershed. The water is clear. You can see the bottom. The flow is steady, even if it hasn't rained recently. The banks are stable, held by roots and vegetation. Fish move in the current. Insects hatch and dance above the water's surface. Now imagine that same stream if the forest were gone. The water would be turbid with sediment. The flow would be erratic, floods following every rain, dry stretches between. The banks would be eroding, collapsing. The streambed would be choked with sediment. Fish populations would be stressed or gone entirely. It's the same water, the same rainfall, the same landscape. But without the forest, the system breaks down. Forests don't just grow alongside water systems. They create and maintain them. Humans and forests have been intertwined for as long as our species has existed. Our earliest ancestors evolved in and around forests in Africa. We climbed trees. We foraged for fruit and nuts in the forest canopy and understory. We hunted game that lived in forests. Even as we evolved to spend more time in savannas and grasslands, forests remained important. When modern humans spread across the globe, we carried forests with us in our minds. We used them for shelter, fuel, food, medicine. We told stories about them, sacred groves, enchanted woods, places where spirits dwelled. Forests became woven into mythology, religion, and culture in every society that encountered them. Let's trace some of these connections, because understanding how deeply forests shaped human civilization makes their importance more tangible. Start with shelter. Trees provide wood, and wood is one of humanity's oldest building materials. Easy to work with stone tools or metal ones. Strong enough to support structures. Abundant in forested regions. For millennia, in Europe, Asia, and the Americas, people built homes from wood. Entire cities were constructed largely from timber. The great wooden temples of Japan, some over 1,000 years old, showcase what's possible with wood as a building material. Skill, knowledge, and maintenance have kept these structures intact across centuries. In Scandinavia, stave churches built in the medieval period still stand, their timber preserved through centuries of snow and rain. Even today, despite steel and concrete, wood remains a primary building material. Modern engineered wood products, laminated beams, cross-laminated timber, are allowing construction of ever taller wooden buildings, some now exceeding 20 stories. Then there's fuel. Before coal, before oil, before natural gas, there was wood. Fire was essential to human survival and development. It provided warmth, protection from predators, and the ability to cook food, which allowed us to extract more nutrients from our diet and supported the evolution of our large brains. For most of human history, firewood was the primary energy source. Even as civilizations grew, as cities expanded, wood remained the dominant fuel. This had consequences. Deforestation around early civilizations, in the Mediterranean, in China, in the Middle East, was often driven by demand for fuel as much as for agricultural land. Ancient Rome, at its height, required vast quantities of wood to heat bathhouses, fire pottery kilns, smelt metal, and cook food for 1 million inhabitants. The forests around Rome were stripped. Wood had to be imported from increasingly distant regions. Similar patterns occurred elsewhere. By the medieval period, England had lost much of its original forest cover, partly from clearing for agriculture, partly from demand for timber and fuel. This drove innovation, more efficient stoves, the transition to coal as a fuel source, but it also left landscapes transformed. Medicine is another deep connection. Traditional societies developed extensive knowledge of forest plants and their medicinal properties. Willow bark for pain and fever, what we now recognize as containing salicylic acid, the basis for aspirin. Cinchona bark for malaria, containing quinine. Foxglove for heart conditions, containing digoxin. These are just a few examples. Indigenous peoples around the world maintain detailed knowledge of hundreds or thousands of plant species, knowing which could heal, which could nourish, which could poison. This knowledge was often oral, passed down through generations, refined over centuries of observation and experimentation. Much of it has been lost as traditional cultures have declined or been suppressed. But some has been preserved and continues to inform modern medicine. A significant percentage of modern pharmaceuticals are derived from plant compounds, many originally identified through traditional knowledge of forest species. Food is perhaps the most fundamental connection. Forests provide food directly, fruits, nuts, mushrooms, game animals, and indirectly, by supporting pollinators and maintaining water systems that agricultural lands depend on. Early human societies were often hunter-gatherers, relying heavily on forest resources. Even as agriculture developed, forests remained important. They provided forage for livestock. They supplied fruits and nuts that supplemented agricultural diets. They were sources of special foods, honey, for example, collected from wild bees nesting in tree cavities. Some traditional agricultural systems integrate forests directly. Agroforestry, where trees are grown alongside crops or used to support livestock, can be more productive and sustainable than either monoculture forestry or agriculture alone. Coffee grown under shade trees. Cacao grown beneath a forest canopy. Livestock grazing in open woodland. These systems mimic natural forest structure, creating vertical layers, maintaining biodiversity, cycling nutrients efficiently. They can produce food while maintaining many of the ecological functions of natural forests. Indigenous peoples often managed forests actively. Controlled burning to maintain open understory, making hunting easier and encouraging certain plant species. Selective harvesting of trees for materials while leaving the forest structure intact. Cultivation of useful species within the forest matrix. The Amazon, long thought to be pristine wilderness, shows signs of extensive human management over thousands of years. Certain tree species are far more common than would be expected naturally, suggesting they were actively cultivated or encouraged by indigenous peoples. Patches of unusually fertile soil, called terra preta, contain charcoal and organic waste, indicating long-term human habitation and soil management. The forest wasn't untouched, but the management was sustainable, maintaining forest cover and ecological function while supporting human populations. This is an important point. The idea that humans must be absent for nature to be healthy is relatively recent and not universally true. Many ecosystems have been shaped by human activity for millennia. The question isn't whether humans should use forests, but how. In ways that maintain the forest, or in ways that degrade or destroy it. Traditional societies often had cultural mechanisms that enforced sustainable use. Sacred groves that couldn't be cut. Taboos against overharvesting certain species. Knowledge systems that recognized the need for forests to regenerate between harvests. These weren't based on modern ecological science, but they often achieved similar outcomes, maintaining forest health over long timescales. Modern industrial forestry is different. Clear-cutting, rapid harvest cycles, conversion to monoculture plantations, these methods maximize short-term economic output but often degrade forests' ecological functions. They reduce biodiversity, simplify structure, disrupt water cycles, and reduce carbon storage. There are movements toward more sustainable approaches. Certification systems like FSC, Forest Stewardship Council, attempt to ensure timber is harvested sustainably. Reduced impact logging techniques minimize damage to the surrounding forest. Community forestry programs give local people control over forest management, often resulting in better conservation outcomes than centralized government or corporate control. The challenge is balancing human needs with forest health. 7 billion people require resources. Wood for building, for paper, for fuel. Land for agriculture to produce food. As populations grow and consumption increases, pressure on forests intensifies. But forests also provide services we need: clean water, climate regulation, biodiversity, carbon storage. We're beginning to understand that these services have economic value. That a standing forest might be worth more, in the long term, than a cleared field or a plantation. It's a shift in perspective. From seeing forests as obstacles to development, or as resources to extract, towards seeing them as living systems providing benefits we cannot easily replace. Not every culture made this connection in time. Easter Island is a cautionary tale. When Polynesian settlers arrived, the island was forested. Over centuries, they cut down trees for timber, for fuel, to transport the famous stone statues. Eventually, the forests were gone. Without trees, soil eroded. Crop production declined. The population crashed. By the time Europeans arrived, Easter Island was largely barren, supporting only a fraction of its former population. It's a small, isolated example, but it illustrates a pattern. Deforestation can undermine the systems societies depend on. And on an island, with nowhere to migrate to, the consequences were unavoidable. Earth, of course, is not an island. Except in one sense, it is. We have nowhere else to go. The forests we have are the forests we get. Lose them, and we lose the services they provide, with no other planet to migrate to, no backup forests waiting somewhere else. Humans and forests have always been connected. We shaped forests, and they shaped us. Our shelters, our tools, our medicines, our myths, all of it intertwined with trees and the life they support. The question now is whether we can maintain that connection in a way that allows both forests and human civilization to thrive. Or whether, like Easter Island on a larger scale, we will realize too late that we needed those forests more than we knew. Let's talk plainly about what's happening. Forests are disappearing. Not slowly, not accidentally, but at a scale and pace that is historically unprecedented. Every year, roughly 10 million hectares of forest are cleared globally, an area about the size of Iceland. That's trees felled, land converted to agriculture or development, ecosystems dismantled. Some of this is legal. Some is illegal. Some is deliberate policy to expand agricultural land. Some is driven by poverty, by people with few options clearing land to grow food. Some is driven by corporate interests, timber extraction, cattle ranching, palm oil plantations, soybean farms. The reasons are complex. The result is not. Forests are vanishing, and with them go the systems we've been discussing. Carbon storage, water regulation, biodiversity, climate stabilization, all of it eroding as forests shrink. Let's quantify some of this. Deforestation releases carbon. When trees are cut and burned or left to decay, the carbon stored in their biomass returns to the atmosphere as carbon dioxide. Estimates suggest that deforestation and forest degradation account for roughly 10 to 15% of global carbon emissions annually. That might not sound like much compared to fossil fuel emissions, but it's substantial. It's roughly equivalent to the emissions from all the cars and trucks on Earth. And it's carbon that could have remained stored for decades or centuries if the forest had been left intact. As atmospheric carbon dioxide increases, global temperatures rise. This isn't speculation, it's physics. Carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. It traps heat. More of it in the atmosphere means more heat retained, which means warming. We're seeing the effects now. Global average temperatures have increased roughly 1.2 degrees Celsius since pre-industrial times. This might not sound like much, but it's already causing observable changes. Ice sheets melting, sea levels rising, weather patterns shifting, heat waves becoming more frequent and intense. And forests are both contributors to this problem and potential solutions. Stop deforestation, and you eliminate a significant source of carbon emissions. Restore forests, and you create carbon sinks that actively draw down atmospheric carbon dioxide. But carbon is only one part of the cost. Biodiversity loss is harder to quantify but no less real. As forests shrink and fragment, species lose habitat. Populations decline. Some species adapt, moving to new areas or changing their behavior. Others cannot adapt and disappear. Extinction is permanent. A species, once gone, cannot be brought back. We're losing species now at rates estimated to be 100 to 1,000 times the natural background rate. The term sixth mass extinction is being used, comparing current biodiversity loss to the 5 major extinction events in Earth's history, the most recent being the one that ended the dinosaurs. This is not hyperbole. This is what biodiversity researchers are documenting. Many of these extinctions are happening in forests, particularly tropical forests where diversity is highest and threats are most severe. Species we've never studied, never even discovered, disappearing before we know they existed. The loss isn't just ethical or aesthetic. It's functional. We've discussed how biodiversity contributes to ecosystem resilience, productivity, and function. As species disappear, ecosystems become simpler, less stable, less able to provide the services we depend on. Water cycles are disrupted when forests are cleared. Rivers fed by forested watersheds see changes in flow, more flooding during rains, more drought between. Water quality declines as sediment and pollutants wash off cleared land. Communities downstream face water shortages, erosion, and degraded water supplies. In some regions, this is creating humanitarian crises. Droughts attributed partly to deforestation affecting rainfall patterns. Floods made worse by loss of forest cover that once absorbed and slowed rainfall. Reservoirs silting up from erosion, reducing capacity for hydroelectric generation and water storage. Local climate changes occur. Areas that were forested and cool become hotter and drier once trees are removed. This affects not just weather but agricultural productivity. Crops that once thrived in the moderated climate of forested landscapes struggle in the hotter, drier conditions after deforestation. There are feedback loops here. Clearing forest makes the region drier. Drier conditions stress remaining forest. Stressed forest is more vulnerable to fire, disease, and further degradation. This can trigger additional forest loss, which further dries the region. The system shifts toward a new, more degraded state. Indigenous peoples and local communities, often the most sustainable stewards of forests, are displaced. Their knowledge, accumulated over generations, is lost. The forest that supported their culture and livelihood is destroyed. They're forced to migrate, to assimilate into different cultures, or to try surviving in degraded landscapes. This is a human cost that's often invisible in global statistics but real nonetheless. Economic costs are substantial too, even when measured in purely monetary terms. The value of forest services, carbon storage, water provision, flood control, pollination, soil protection, climate regulation, has been estimated in the hundreds of billions to trillions of dollars annually. Lose the forests, and you lose those services. Replacing them, if it's even possible, is expensive. Building water treatment facilities. Constructing flood control infrastructure. Dealing with the costs of climate change. Coping with crop failures from loss of pollinators or water supply. It's often cheaper to protect forests than to replace what they do. But economics doesn't always work that way in practice. The benefits of forests accrue over time and to many people, often downstream or downwind. The benefits of clearing forests, agricultural income, timber sales, are immediate and concentrated to the people doing the clearing. This creates a tragedy of the commons. Individual actors profit from deforestation while everyone shares the cost of losing the forest services. Without regulation, compensation, or collective action, the rational individual choice is often to clear more forest, even though collectively we'd be better off preserving it. The solutions aren't simple. You can't just tell people not to cut trees if they have no other way to survive. You can't preserve forests without addressing poverty, governance, economic development, land rights, and agricultural productivity. But the costs of inaction are clear. Continued deforestation accelerates climate change, which threatens food production, water supplies, and habitability in many regions. It drives species extinct, reducing the planet's biological richness and potentially eliminating resources we haven't yet discovered or understood. It destabilizes the very systems that human civilization depends on. This isn't alarmism. It's assessment based on what we know about how these systems work. Forests have existed for hundreds of millions of years. They've survived ice ages, asteroid impacts, massive volcanic eruptions, and countless other disruptions. They're resilient, adaptable, persistent, but they can be destroyed. And we're doing it, faster than at any point in human history, perhaps faster than at any point in millions of years. The question is whether we'll recognize the cost in time to change course. Here's a reason for hope. Forests, when given the chance, can come back. Not always. Not everywhere. Not to their original state necessarily. But ecosystems have a remarkable capacity for recovery if the conditions are right. Let's talk about what recovery looks like and what makes it possible. Imagine a field that was once forest. The trees were cut down decades ago. The land was farmed for a while, then abandoned. Maybe the soil became depleted, or the owner moved away, or economic conditions changed. Now the field sits empty. Grass and weeds grow where crops once did. What happens next? If you observe over months and years, you'll see succession. Ecological succession, the process by which an ecosystem gradually transforms from one state to another. The first colonizers are usually fast-growing herbaceous plants. Weeds, from a human perspective, but pioneers from an ecological one. They grow quickly, produce abundant seeds, tolerate harsh conditions. They stabilize the soil, begin adding organic matter as they die and decompose. After a few years, shrubs appear. Seeds arrive on the wind, in bird droppings, carried by animals. These shrubs are also pioneers, fast-growing, tolerant of full sun and poor soil. They begin to create shade, altering conditions on the ground beneath them. Then trees arrive. Again, starting with pioneer species. In temperate regions, these might be aspens, birches, or pines, species that grow fast in full sun, that produce abundant seeds dispersed widely. They establish in the understory of the shrubs, then grow taller, eventually overtopping the shrubs and creating a young forest. This young forest looks nothing like the original mature forest. It's dense with small trees, all roughly the same age. Biodiversity is lower. Structure is simpler. But it's a forest, and it's starting to perform forest functions, storing carbon, stabilizing soil, moderating temperature, providing habitat. Over more decades, the forest continues to change. Some trees grow faster than others and dominate. Slower-growing trees die from lack of light. Gaps open when large trees fall, allowing new growth. Gradually, the forest becomes more complex. Different age classes of trees. More layers. More niches for other species. If left undisturbed for a century or two, depending on the region and climate, the forest can develop complexity approaching the original. Not identical, the species composition might differ, especially if some of the original species no longer exist in the region. But functionally similar. Structurally complex. Ecologically rich. This is natural regeneration, and it's how forests have recovered from disturbances throughout their evolutionary history. Fire, storms, disease outbreaks, ice ages, all of these have cleared forests at various scales, and forests have regrown. But natural regeneration has limitations. First, it requires a source of seeds. If the cleared area is small and surrounded by intact forest, seeds will arrive readily. If the cleared area is vast, far from any remaining forest, seed arrival becomes a limiting factor. Birds and wind can only disperse seeds so far. Without nearby forest, succession can stall at an early stage, with grassland or shrubland persisting for decades or longer. Second, soil condition matters. If the soil is intact, with its microbial communities and organic matter preserved, regeneration can proceed quickly. If the soil has been eroded, compacted, or chemically degraded, plant establishment becomes difficult. Pioneer species might struggle. Succession slows. Third, climate and disturbance regime matter. If the climate has changed since the original forest was cleared, the same species might no longer be suited to the conditions. If fires or grazing pressure are frequent, young trees might be killed repeatedly, preventing forest establishment. Given these limitations, people often try to accelerate recovery through active restoration, planting trees rather than waiting for natural regeneration. This can work well, but it requires care. Simply planting trees doesn't guarantee forest restoration. The wrong species, planted in the wrong conditions, will fail. Monoculture plantations, rows of a single species, all the same age, provide some forest functions like carbon storage but lack the biodiversity and structural complexity of natural forests. They're vulnerable to pests and diseases. They provide limited habitat. They're forests in the most technical sense but lack much of what makes forests ecologically valuable. Good restoration considers species diversity, planting multiple species adapted to local conditions. It considers structure, mimicking the layered complexity of natural forests. It protects the site from disturbances like grazing or fire that could kill young trees. And ideally, it learns from natural forests, using them as models for what to create. There are success stories. The Atlantic forest of Brazil, once reduced to less than 10% of its original extent, has seen some recovery through active restoration and natural regeneration on abandoned agricultural lands. While still far below historical levels and highly fragmented, the trend shows that recovery is possible. In Europe, forest cover has actually increased over recent decades. Not because of restoration efforts primarily, but because agricultural land has been abandoned as farming has intensified elsewhere. Natural regeneration has reforested these areas, increasing total forest cover. China has undertaken massive reforestation efforts, planting billions of trees. The results are mixed. Many plantations are monocultures with limited biodiversity, and some were planted in areas where forests didn't historically exist, potentially causing unintended ecological problems. But in some regions, forest cover has increased substantially, with benefits for soil stabilization and local climate. Rewilding is a related concept, not just planting trees, but allowing natural processes to restore ecosystems with minimal human intervention. Remove livestock grazing from degraded lands. Reintroduce missing species, particularly large herbivores and predators. Let succession proceed naturally, with the assumption that natural processes will create ecosystems more complex and resilient than we could design intentionally. Rewilding has shown promise in some areas. The reintroduction of wolves to Yellowstone National Park in the United States had cascading effects, reducing deer populations, allowing aspen and willow to regenerate, supporting beaver populations, improving stream health. The entire ecosystem shifted toward a more complex, more functional state. Transferring this to forests, rewilding might mean allowing abandoned agricultural land to reforest naturally while protecting it from disturbance and potentially reintroducing species that have been extirpated. But rewilding isn't a panacea. It requires large areas. It can conflict with human land use. And in many regions, the original ecosystems are so disrupted that natural processes alone won't restore them. Invasive species, altered fire regimes, or changed climate conditions prevent recovery without intervention. There's also the question of scale. Natural regeneration can restore individual cleared patches or even landscapes over decades to centuries. But can it restore millions of hectares of forest lost globally? Can it happen fast enough to matter for climate change, which is accelerating now? The answer depends on choices we make. If deforestation stops, if degraded lands are given space to recover, if we actively support restoration where natural regeneration won't suffice, then yes, significant forest recovery is possible this century. Forests are resilient. They've persisted for hundreds of millions of years through worse disruptions than what we've caused so far. But resilience has limits. Push a system too far, change conditions too severely, and recovery becomes impossible, at least on human timescales. We're not past that point yet. Forests can recover. The question is whether we'll let them. Let's look forward now. Not decades, but a century or more. What will forests look like in a changing world? Climate change is altering the conditions forests evolved in. Temperature, precipitation patterns, the frequency and intensity of droughts, storms, and fires, all of this is shifting. And forests, long-lived as they are, must adapt or move or decline. Some changes are already visible. In many temperate regions, spring is arriving earlier. Trees leaf out earlier. Flowers bloom earlier. This affects the timing of insect emergence, bird migration, everything timed to coincide with the pulse of spring growth. If the timing gets mismatched, birds arriving after insects have already peaked. For example, populations suffer. Droughts are becoming more common and more severe in many regions. Trees stressed by lack of water are vulnerable to pests and diseases. Bark beetles, for example, have killed millions of hectares of coniferous forest in North America in recent decades, their outbreaks intensified by drought-weakened trees and milder winters that no longer kill beetle larvae. Fires are changing too. In many forested regions, fire seasons are lengthening, fires are becoming larger and more intense, and areas that historically burned rarely or not at all are now experiencing major fires. This is partly due to past fire suppression creating fuel buildup, but it's also driven by warmer temperatures and drier conditions making forests more flammable. Some forests are adapted to fire. Certain pine species have thick bark, cones that open after fire, and seedlings that establish quickly in burned areas. But many forests didn't evolve with frequent fire. When intense fires hit these forests, tropical rainforests, for example, or temperate forests in regions that were historically too wet to burn, the result can be catastrophic. Trees die. Soil is damaged. Recovery is slow or impossible. As conditions change, forests might move. Not individual trees walking across the landscape, obviously, but populations shifting over generations. Trees at the southern edge of their range, where it's too warm or too dry, die without being replaced. Trees at the northern edge, where it was previously too cold, now find conditions suitable and expand into areas that were once tundra or grassland. This is already happening. Boreal forests are expanding northward in many areas. Tree lines on mountains are moving upward. In some temperate regions, species compositions are shifting as southern species expand north and northern species retreat. But this movement has limits. Trees can only disperse so fast, typically a few kilometers per century for wind-dispersed species, though faster for species dispersed by birds or mammals. If climate shifts faster than trees can migrate, populations get left behind in unsuitable conditions. Fragmentation makes this worse. If forests are broken into isolated patches surrounded by agriculture or development, trees can't migrate. Seeds can't reach new areas. populations trapped in unsuitable conditions decline without replacement. There's also the question of soil. Even if seeds reach new areas, the soil there might not be suitable. Boreal forests expanding into tundra are encountering shallow soils over permafrost. As permafrost thaws, conditions are becoming more suitable for trees, but the soil chemistry and structure are different from what those trees evolved with. Whether they can thrive long-term is uncertain. Some forests might not move but rather change composition. Species tolerant of warmer, drier, or otherwise altered conditions increase in abundance, while less tolerant species decline. The forest persists, but it becomes a different forest, different species, different structure, different ecological characteristics. In some cases, forests might cross thresholds and shift to non-forest states. If conditions become too dry, or fires too frequent, forests can transition to grasslands or shrublands. This has happened historically in response to climate changes, and it could happen again. The Amazon is particularly concerning in this regard. If warming and drying continue, if deforestation pushes the system past a tipping point, parts of the Amazon could transition from rainforest to a drier, more open ecosystem. This would release vast amounts of carbon, accelerate climate change, and result in the loss of the Amazon's climate-regulating functions. Whether this happens depends on how much warming occurs, which depends on how much carbon we emit, which depends on choices humanity makes in the coming decades. There are also opportunities. Restoration of degraded lands, reforestation of areas that have been cleared, afforestation, planting trees in areas that weren't historically forested but where conditions now or in the future might support them. These efforts could increase forest cover, enhance carbon storage, and create habitat. But they need to be done carefully. Planting trees in ecosystems that evolved without them, grasslands, wetlands, tundra, can cause ecological harm, reducing biodiversity, altering water cycles, and providing relatively little carbon storage benefit compared to protecting existing forests. There's also increasing interest in assisted migration, deliberately moving tree populations to areas where climate projections suggest conditions will be suitable in the future, even if they're not currently found there. This is controversial. It's ecological experimentation on a massive scale, with uncertain outcomes. But in some cases, it might be necessary if we want forests to persist through rapid climate change. Technology might play a role. Genomics could identify tree populations with genetic traits suited to warmer or drier conditions, allowing selective breeding or targeted restoration. Advances in understanding soil microbiology could help restore degraded soils faster, making reforestation more successful. Remote sensing and AI could monitor forests globally, detecting stress, disease, or illegal logging in near real time. But none of this is guaranteed. The future of forests depends on how much the climate changes, how societies respond, and whether we prioritize forest conservation and restoration. In a high-warming scenario, where emissions continue unchecked and global temperatures rise 3 or 4 degrees Celsius or more, forests face enormous stress. Massive die-offs, widespread fires, shifts to non-forest ecosystems in many regions, loss of the biodiversity and carbon storage forests currently provide. In a low-warming scenario, where emissions are reduced rapidly and warming is limited to 1.5 or 2 degrees, forests still face challenges but have much better prospects. Many forests can adapt. Restoration efforts can succeed. Forests continue providing crucial services to both ecosystems and human societies. The difference between these scenarios is profound. And the choice between them is happening now, in policy decisions, investment choices, and the everyday actions of billions of people. Forests have endured ice ages and mass extinctions. They've spread across continents and retreated, adapted to new conditions, evolved into countless forms. They're remarkably resilient. But they can't endure everything. And the pace of change now is faster than anything forests have experienced in millions of years. The forests of the future might look different from the forests we know. But whether they exist at all, whether they continue to perform the functions that make Earth habitable, depends on what we do in the very near future. Here's a thought experiment. Imagine humanity one day establishes a permanent settlement on another planet. Mars, perhaps. Or a moon of Jupiter or Saturn. Or an exoplanet circling another star, reached after generations aboard a spacecraft. Could we create forests there? Not native forests. If life exists elsewhere, it likely evolved along entirely different lines. But forests as we know them. Trees from Earth, growing in alien soil, under alien skies. Why would we want to? For practical reasons, mostly. Forests provide services, oxygen production, food, materials, water cycling, psychological well-being. If humans are going to live permanently beyond Earth, we'll need ecosystems, not just technology, to support us. But can it be done? What would it take? First, atmosphere. Trees need carbon dioxide to photosynthesize, but they also need oxygen for respiration. Humans need oxygen to breathe. Any settlement would need a breathable atmosphere, which means either an existing oxygen-rich atmosphere or enclosed habitats where atmosphere can be controlled. Mars has an atmosphere, but it's mostly carbon dioxide and extremely thin, less than 1% the pressure of Earth's sea level. You can't grow trees in that without enclosing them in pressurized greenhouses. The Moon has essentially no atmosphere. Same problem. So we're talking about enclosed habitats. Domes, tunnels, underground caverns, spaces where atmosphere can be maintained at pressures and compositions suitable for life. Second, soil. Or something like it. Trees need a substrate to anchor in and to provide nutrients. Martian or lunar regolith, the loose material covering the surface, is not soil. It lacks organic matter, lacks the microbial life that makes soil functional. It might contain toxic compounds like perchlorates on Mars. You'd need to create soil. Bring organic matter, or create it through composting waste. Introduce bacteria and fungi to begin cycling nutrients. Mix the regolith with organic material to create something resembling Earth's soil. This would take time, resources, and considerable effort. Third, water. Trees need water, lots of it. Mars has water ice at the poles and likely underground, but extracting and purifying it requires energy and infrastructure. The Moon has water ice and permanently shadowed craters, but it's not easily accessible. You'd need water recycling systems. Capture the moisture transpired by trees, condense it, return it to the soil. Minimize losses. It's doable in a closed system, but it requires technology and monitoring. Fourth, light. Trees need sunlight. On Mars, sunlight is weaker than on Earth. Mars is farther from the sun, so it receives only about 40% of the sunlight per unit area that Earth does. This would slow growth, but many tree species could adapt, particularly those from higher latitudes or understory environments where light is naturally limited. On a moon like Europa or Titan, much farther from the sun, natural sunlight would be insufficient. You'd need artificial lighting, powered by nuclear reactors or some other energy source. This adds complexity and energy requirements. Fifth, time. Even with ideal conditions, trees grow slowly. You could start with fast-growing species, willows, poplars, certain pines, but even these take years to reach maturity. Creating a forest ecosystem with complex structure and biodiversity takes decades or centuries. Could it be done? Technically, yes. It's within the realm of plausible future technology. We could, in theory, create enclosed habitats on Mars or the Moon with controlled atmosphere, soil, water, and light, and grow trees in them. But the scale is important. To create a forest large enough to provide meaningful ecological services, oxygen production, food, materials, you'd need habitats kilometers across. The engineering challenges and resource requirements are enormous. It might be more practical, at least initially, to focus on smaller, faster-growing plants. Algae for oxygen production and food. Fast-cycling crops for nutrition. Trees might come later, once infrastructure is more established and resources more abundant. There's also the question of whether we should. Bringing Earth life to other worlds raises ethical and practical concerns. If indigenous life exists, even microbial life, introducing Earth organisms could disrupt or destroy it. This would be a form of ecological imperialism, potentially extinguishing the only other example of life we've found. Even on worlds that appear lifeless, there's the question of contamination. If Mars once had life, traces might still exist in the soil or subsurface. Introducing Earth microbes could obliterate evidence of that past life before we've had a chance to study it. Protocols exist to minimize contamination, but they're not perfect. And once life is introduced, it's nearly impossible to remove. Setting aside the ethical concerns, let's return to the thought experiment. Imagine we've determined a world is lifeless, and we decide to terraform it, alter its environment to make it Earth-like. Could forests play a role? Absolutely. If you could somehow generate a thicker atmosphere on Mars, warm the planet enough to allow liquid water on the surface, and introduce oxygen, forests could potentially grow in the open. They'd contribute to oxygen production, stabilize soil, cycle water, moderate climate, the same functions they perform on Earth. Some scientists have proposed using photosynthetic organisms, algae, lichens, or engineered microbes, as a first step in terraforming. These organisms could, over centuries or millennia, convert some of the carbon dioxide in Mars' atmosphere to oxygen. Once oxygen levels rose and conditions moderated, plants, and eventually trees, could be introduced. Terraforming is speculative, far beyond current capabilities, and would require millennia to complete, if it's possible at all. But it illustrates the point: forests are planetary-scale systems. They don't just exist on a planet, they shape it. On Earth, forests transformed the atmosphere over hundreds of millions of years. They made the planet habitable for animals, including us. In principle, they could do the same elsewhere, given enough time. There's a deeper question here. If we do establish ourselves beyond Earth, will we bring forests with us not just for practical reasons but for psychological ones? Humans evolved in and around trees. We seem to have an innate affinity for forests, biophilia, the love of living things. Studies show that people feel calmer, happier, more restored in forested environments than in barren or artificial ones. Will future generations living on Mars or in orbital habitats need forests for their well-being? Will a settlement without trees feel incomplete, alien, psychologically harmful? We don't know. But it's worth considering. Forests might be essential not just for oxygen and food, but for making places feel like home. There's an irony here. We're imagining bringing forests to lifeless worlds while simultaneously struggling to maintain the forests we have on the only living world we know. If we can't preserve forests on Earth, a planet perfectly suited to them, what hope do we have of creating them elsewhere? Perhaps the lesson is that forests are rare and precious. Not just on Earth, but potentially anywhere. Life is difficult to create, ecosystems take time to develop, and forests represent the culmination of hundreds of millions of years of evolution. They're not easy to replicate or replace. Whether we ever create forests on other worlds remains to be seen. But the fact that we can even imagine it speaks to how central forests are to our conception of what makes a place livable. They're not just features of Earth. They're emblematic of living planets, of complexity, stability, richness, of worlds where life has had time to grow, spread, and transform the environment into something capable of supporting still more life. Earth has forests. That makes it unusual, possibly unique. And that makes those forests worth preserving. You're walking through a forest. No destination. No rush. Just moving slowly between trees, your footsteps soft on the leaf-covered ground. And gradually, you notice something changing inside you. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders drop. The constant chatter of thoughts, worries, plans, it quiets. Not disappearing entirely, but fading to the background. You become more aware of the present moment. The texture of bark on a nearby trunk. The pattern of light filtering through leaves. The sound of wind moving through branches high above. You feel calmer, more at peace. Why? This experience is common enough to be nearly universal. Across cultures, across time, people have described feeling something special in forests. Spiritual, some say. Restorative. Healing. Words vary, but the underlying experience, that forests affect us psychologically, that they make us feel different, is consistent. Science has started to study this. The field of ecopsychology and related research in environmental psychology and public health has documented measurable benefits of spending time in forests. Reduced stress hormones, lower blood pressure, improved mood, enhanced cognitive function. These aren't subjective impressions, they're quantifiable effects. One hypothesis is biophilia. Proposed by biologist E.O. Wilson, biophilia suggests humans have an innate affinity for nature and living things, shaped by evolution. We evolved in natural environments. Our ancestors who paid attention to natural cues, where water flowed, where fruit ripened, where predators lurked, survived better than those who didn't. Over millions of years, this could have shaped our psychology to respond positively to nature. Forests, in particular, might resonate because they were important in our evolutionary history. They provided food, shelter, safety. Early humans lived in and around forests, used them constantly. A positive emotional response to forests, feeling safe, calm, curious, might have been adaptive. This is speculative, but there's supporting evidence. Infants and young children show preferences for natural environments over built ones, even before they've had significant exposure to nature. This suggests the preference might be at least partly innate. There are also physiological factors. Forests are perceptually calming. The predominant colors are greens and browns, which are less stimulating than the bright, high-contrast colors common in urban environments. The sounds are softer, rustling leaves, bird calls, water flowing, without the jarring noises of traffic, construction, or machinery. The air often smells different, carrying compounds released by plants and soil that we perceive as pleasant. Some plants release volatile organic compounds, phytoncides, that have antimicrobial properties. These compounds, particularly common in coniferous forests, might have subtle effects on human physiology, including boosting immune function and reducing stress. The Japanese practice of Shinrin-yoku, or forest bathing, is partly based on exposure to these compounds. Then there's the visual complexity. Forests are intricate. Everywhere you look, there's detail, the branching patterns of trees, the variety of leaves, the play of light and shadow, the textures of bark and moss and lichen. This complexity is engaging without being overwhelming. It holds attention in a soft, effortless way, allowing the mind to rest from the directed attention required by work or screens. Environmental psychologists call this soft fascination. Unlike the hard, directed attention required to focus on a task, soft fascination allows the mind to wander gently while remaining engaged. This is restorative. It replenishes cognitive resources, reduces mental fatigue, and allows creative thinking. Forests also provide solitude and quiet, increasingly rare in modern life. In a forest, especially away from trails and roads, you can be alone in a way that's difficult to achieve in cities. This solitude isn't loneliness, it's a break from social demands, from constant interaction, from the need to present and monitor oneself. There's something about scale, too. Trees are big. Old trees are enormous. Standing next to a centuries-old oak or sequoia, you feel small. Not insignificant, necessarily, but contextually placed. Human concerns, deadlines, conflicts, worries feel smaller in the presence of something so large and so old. It's a shift in perspective. Time feels different in forests. Trees live slowly. They grow incrementally, season after season, decade after decade. Change happens, but at a pace outside human urgency. This can be calming. In a world where everything seems to demand immediate response, forests simply exist, patient and unhurried. Some people describe spiritual experiences in forests. Feelings of connection to something larger. Transcendence. Awe. These experiences are harder to quantify, but they're real to those who have them. Whether they're generated by the brain's response to sensory input, by evolved psychological mechanisms, or by something more metaphysical depends on your perspective. What's clear is that forests affect us. They change our physiology, our mood, our cognition. They make us feel different, usually better. This might be why so many cultures have sacred forests. Groves dedicated to gods. Places where ceremonies were held, where people went to seek guidance or healing. The forest as a liminal space, between the human and the more than human. Between the known and the mysterious. Modern environmental psychology supports the intuition behind these traditions. Forests are therapeutic. Time spent in forests reduces anxiety and depression. Walks in forests lower stress more effectively than walks in urban environments. Views of forests from hospital windows correlate with faster recovery from surgery. Some countries have formalized this. South Korea has designated forests for healing. Japan promotes forest bathing as a public health initiative. Some doctors in Scotland can now prescribe time in nature as treatment for mental and physical health conditions. This matters because modern life, for many people, is increasingly disconnected from nature. Urban environments, screen-dominated lives, indoor work, these are recent and evolutionary terms. We're adapted to environments full of life, complexity, and natural rhythms. Removing that might have costs we're only beginning to recognize. Rising rates of anxiety, depression, and attention disorders, particularly in urbanized populations, might be partly attributable to nature deficit. This isn't the only factor. Modern life is complex, and mental health is influenced by many things. But the correlation between urbanization and mental health problems is real, and access to nature appears protective. Forests might not solve everything, but they help. They provide something we need, something that's difficult to replace with technology or architecture or pharmaceutical interventions. So when you walk into a forest and feel that shift, the calming, the quieting, the sense of being held by something larger and older, you're not imagining it. It's a real response, possibly shaped by millions of years of evolution, certainly influenced by the immediate sensory and psychological effects of being in a complex living system. Forests are ecosystems. They provide services, carbon storage, water regulation, biodiversity. But they're also places that affect us, that change how we feel and think, that connect us, even if briefly, to something beyond human concerns. This is value too. Harder to quantify than carbon tons or hectares of habitat. But real. Perhaps essential. We need forests not just to regulate Earth's climate or provide materials or protect biodiversity. We need them for ourselves, for our well-being, for the quiet, restorative experiences they offer, for the reminder that we're part of something larger, that the world is alive, complex, and beautiful, and that, in a forest, breathing deeply beneath ancient trees, we can still feel at home. Let's return to where we began. You're standing in a forest. Perhaps the same forest from the opening, or perhaps another, somewhere else on Earth. It doesn't matter. Forests, in all their diversity, share common truths. The sun has moved since you first arrived. Light slants differently now, creating new patterns of shadow and illumination. You've been here a while, and the forest has revealed things you didn't notice at first. You see it differently now. That tree, the large one, trunk wider than you could wrap your arms around, is not just standing there. It's working. Right now. Roots are drawing water from soil. That water is moving up through the trunk, through branches, to leaves. In those leaves, chloroplasts are capturing photons from the sun, splitting water molecules, releasing oxygen, building sugars. Carbon dioxide from the air is being pulled in, transformed, incorporated into the tree's structure. This tree is building itself from air and water and light. And as it does this, it's affecting everything around it. The moisture it releases through transpiration is joining water vapor rising from countless other trees, forming the microclimate of this forest, contributing to clouds that will bring rain. The carbon it captures is being locked away, held in what that might stand for centuries. The oxygen it releases is entering the atmosphere, available for any organism that needs it, including you. The tree is not alone. Beneath your feet, roots intertwine. Fungal networks connect this tree to others, exchanging nutrients, perhaps signals, forming a web of relationships that extends through the soil in all directions. Bacteria in the soil are fixing nitrogen, decomposing organic matter, cycling elements through forms that living organisms can use. Above, in the canopy, life you can't see is happening. Birds nesting, insects feeding on leaves, being hunted by spiders, being parasitized by wasps. Pollinators moving between flowers. Lichens and mosses covering bark, sheltering microscopic organisms. Woodpeckers excavating cavities that will later house owls, squirrels, or bees. The forest is not a collection of objects. It's a web of processes. Continuous. Interconnected. Ancient. And it's quiet. That's what strikes you most. Despite all this activity, all this life, the forest is quiet. Trees don't rush. They grow incrementally, responding to light and water and nutrients with patience measured in decades. They can't run from danger. They can't actively hunt. They stand, and they respond, and they grow, and eventually they die, and in their death they provide resources for the next generation. Forests work on timescales that dwarf human attention spans. A tree that fell years ago is still decomposing, still releasing nutrients, still providing habitat. A tree that sprouted this year might not reach maturity for 50 or 100 years. The forest as a whole has been here far longer than you, will be here after you, assuming it's protected. This continuity is humbling. The forest doesn't care about quarterly profits, political cycles, daily news. It operates on deeper rhythms. Seasons. Decades. Centuries. Millennia. But it's not separate from human concerns. It's central to them. Every breath you take depends on systems like this. Every sip of clean water you drink is filtered through landscapes that include forests. The stability of Earth's climate relies on forests storing carbon, moving water, moderating temperature. The food you eat depends on pollinators and water cycles and soil health that forests support. The materials in your home, the paper you write on, countless products you use daily, come from forests or depend on services forests provide. You are not separate from forests. You never were. We've built a civilization that often treats nature as separate. Something out there. A place to visit, resources to extract, scenery to admire. But this separation is an illusion. We are organisms, embedded in ecosystems, dependent on the living systems of Earth. Forests are not background scenery. They are infrastructure. Living infrastructure, maintaining itself, providing services essential to all life, including human life. And they're fragile. Not in the sense of being delicate or weak. Forests are remarkably resilient, capable of recovering from massive disturbances given time. But fragile in that they can be destroyed faster than they can regrow. Fragile in that once certain thresholds are crossed, recovery becomes impossible. Fragile in that the systems they support, climate, water cycles, biodiversity, can shift into degraded states that persist for centuries or millennia. We are at a moment where choices matter. Continued current trends, deforestation, climate change, habitat destruction, and forests decline. Their ability to regulate climate weakens. Biodiversity collapses. Water cycles destabilize. The planet becomes less habitable. Or change course. Protect remaining forests. Restore degraded lands. Support the people living in and around forests to manage them sustainably. Address climate change by reducing emissions, which also reduces stress on forests. Value forests not just for timber or land conversion, but for the irreplaceable services they provide. These aren't easy choices. They involve trade-offs, costs, difficult decisions about land use, development, and how societies function. But they're necessary if we want the planet to remain habitable, diverse, and stable. Forests have been here for 400 million years. They've shaped Earth's atmosphere, climate, and landscapes. They've supported life through countless upheavals. They've allowed humanity to exist and civilization to develop. They're still here, still working, still shaping the world. Quiet giants. Patient beyond measure. Fundamental to everything. You take a breath. Deep and slow. In that breath is the work of forests. Not metaphorically, but literally. Oxygen created by photosynthesis. Air purified by passage through leaves and over soil. Carbon dioxide you exhale will be captured, transformed, woven back into living tissue. You stand among trees. And for a moment, you understand. Not just intellectually, but viscerally. This place is not decoration. It is not scenery. It is not separate from your life or your future. This place is one of the engines that keeps Earth alive. And it's worth protecting. Not for the trees' sake alone. Not out of nostalgia or sentiment. But because we need it. Because our children will need it. Because a planet without forests is a planet diminished, struggling, less able to support the abundance and diversity of life that makes Earth exceptional. Forests do not rush. They stand, patient, ancient, working constantly at a pace too slow to perceive but powerful enough to shape continents and climates. They shape the fate of Earth quietly, without fanfare, without demanding recognition, but they shape it nonetheless. And we, at last, must choose whether to let them continue their work, or whether to dismantle systems we depend on but cannot replace. The choice is ours. The consequences belong to everyone. Stand here a moment longer. Listen. Feel. Remember. This place is working. Breathing. Balancing. Creating. Sustaining. And it's asking nothing in return, except to be allowed to continue. Stay here a little longer. The light is fading now. The forest is dimmer, softer. Shadows stretch between the trees. The air cools. The sounds change. Day creatures grow quiet. Night ones begin to stir. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls. Slow, measured, certain. The wind moves gently through the canopy. Leaves whisper to one another. A language older than memory. You don't need to understand it. Just listen. Your breathing matches the rhythm of the forest. Slow in. Slow out. Nothing is asking anything of you here. No deadlines. No notifications. No unfinished tasks. Just trees. And air. And time moving at its own patient pace. The forest will keep working through the night. Roots drawing water. Leaves releasing what they no longer need. Soil organisms recycling what has fallen. Stars turning slowly overhead. You can rest. The systems that keep the world alive are still moving. Even while you sleep. You've done enough for today. Let your shoulders soften. Let your thoughts drift like mist between trunks. Let the darkness feel safe. Imagine lying beneath these trees, looking up through branches at a sky scattered with quiet stars. The forest standing around you, ancient, steady, protective. You are small here, but not insignificant. You belong to this living world, and it belongs, in some quiet way, to you. Take one more slow breath. Inhale, cool night air. Exhale, anything you no longer need to carry. The forest is still here. It will be here in the morning. For now, rest. Good night.